There is a particular kind of urgency that arrives quietly in retirement. It does not announce itself the way a deadline announces itself when you are young and working. The meeting on Tuesday, the payment due on the 1st, the performance review in March. It arrives the way a season changes, gradually, and then all at once. And by the time you feel it fully, some of the options that existed before it arrived have already closed. I have watched people I cared about feel this urgency arrive too late to do anything graceful with it. Not because they were careless people, because nobody told them the clock was running while they were busy living. I am telling you now. The specific urgency I want to talk about today is this. The window for building reliable dividend income in your retirement portfolio is narrowing, not because dividend income is going away. It is not going away. It is one of the oldest and most durable forms of wealth in the history of markets. It is narrowing because the conditions that make it easiest and fastest to build, conditions that exist right now in 2026 because of exactly where interest rates are and where they are heading, will not hold indefinitely. And the seniors who understand what that window is and move through it deliberately in the next several months will build an income stream that will serve them for the rest of their lives. The seniors who are still trying to decide will move through it also. Only they will move through it without having built anything. The clock is not a metaphor. It is a description of something real and measurable. I am going to show you exactly what it looks like, exactly why it is running, and exactly what the quickest legitimate path through it is. Not the most complicated path. Not the path that requires you to become a financial analyst. The quickest one. The one that people who know this space well would take if they were starting today with the same constraints most of you are working within. I want to begin with a woman I have known for 11 years. I will call her Dolores, because she chose that name herself when I asked her how she wanted to appear in this work. And she chose it because it was her mother's name, and she wanted her mother's memory in something that helped people. Dolores is 71. She spent 34 years as a registered nurse in a hospital system in western Pennsylvania. She retired at 67 with a pension that covers her basic expenses and a modest IRA she built through years of careful contributions. She is not wealthy. She is not in financial trouble. She is in the particular position that millions of American seniors occupy, enough to live on, not enough to feel certain, looking for the difference between getting by and genuine security. 3 years ago, Dolores called me because her CD had matured and the bank's renewal offer was nearly 2 percentage points lower than what she had been earning. She had heard about dividends. She had a neighbor who talked about dividend stocks the way some people talk about a church they found that finally felt like home, with the particular devotion of someone whose life had been changed by the discovery. But Dolores was afraid. Not of the market in the abstract way that people who have never invested are afraid of it. She had watched the market long enough to know that it moved, that it fell, that it took years sometimes to return to where it had been. What she was afraid of was the irreversibility of a mistake made with money she did not have enough of to survive a significant mistake. She said to me, "I don't have time to be wrong twice." That sentence has stayed with me. It is the truest thing I have heard anyone say about investing in retirement. You do not have time to be wrong twice. The margin that existed when you were 40, when a bad decision could be outlasted by decades of continued earning, that margin is different now. It is not gone. I want to be careful about that, because the belief that the margin is entirely gone is what keeps too many seniors out of investments that would genuinely serve them. But it is different. It is compressed. And investing in the compressed margin requires a different approach than investing in the open expanse of a working life. What I told Dolores, and what I am going to tell you, is that dividend income done correctly is not the opposite of safety. It is a different form of it, and the quickest path to it, the one that protects you against the fear of being wrong twice, is built on 3 principles that I want to walk through today with the same care I would give someone I was genuinely responsible for. Before I get to those 3 principles, I need to explain the clock. Because the urgency I am describing is not manufactured. It is not the urgency of a salesperson who needs you to buy before the end of the quarter. It is the urgency of a season that is genuinely passing, and I want you to understand why. The Federal Reserve has been cutting interest rates. This is not a prediction. It is a fact of the environment we are living in right now. When the Fed cuts rates, the yield on every safe fixed instrument in the American economy, CDs, savings accounts, money market funds, short-term treasury bonds, falls with it. We have already seen this happen. The seniors who were earning 5% on a CD 2 years ago are renewing today at 2.5%. sometimes less. The high-yield savings account that was paying 4.25 is paying 3, and it will pay less before the cutting cycle ends. Here is what this has to do with dividends, and here is why the clock is running. When interest rates fall, dividend-paying stocks become relatively more attractive. An investor who can earn 5% risk-free on a CD has less reason to hold a dividend stock yielding 4%. But an investor who can only earn 2.5% risk-free has a powerful reason to consider a stock that pays 4% and grows that payment over time instead. As more investors reach that conclusion, they move into dividend stocks. That movement raises prices, and when prices rise, the yield, the dividend payment expressed as a percentage of the stock price, falls. This is the mechanism. This is the clock. Right now, in 2026, many dividend-paying companies are still priced in a way that reflects the higher rate environment of the recent past. The full repricing, the full migration of capital from fixed income into dividend stocks that historically accompanies a sustained rate-cutting cycle has not yet completed. Which means that the yields available to someone entering the dividend income space today are more generous than they will be 18 months from now if this cycle continues on its current path. You can buy more income per dollar today than you will be able to buy for that same dollar later. That is the window. That is what is closing, not slammed shut, not vanishing overnight. Closing, the way a window closes when the season turns and the air outside begins to carry something different than it carried before. My grandfather used to say, "The fish do not wait for you to finish your coffee." He was a man who fished the same river his entire life and never once arrived at it in a hurry, and yet he also never wasted the moments when the water was right. There is a difference between urgency and panic. Urgency is knowing when the water is right and being ready. Panic is running to the river without knowing what you are doing when you get there. I am not asking you to panic. I am asking you to be ready. The first principle of the quickest path to dividend income is this: start with what does not require you to be right about any individual company. This is where most people who are new to dividend investing make their first and most costly mistake. They hear about dividends and they immediately begin looking for the best stock, the highest yielder, the company that has raised its dividend the most, the one a podcast mentioned or a neighbor swears by. And the search for the best individual stock is exactly where the fear of being wrong twice is most likely to be justified. Individual companies cut dividends. They face disruption. They make decisions that hurt shareholders. The history of high dividend individual stocks is a history that includes spectacular failures alongside the spectacular successes, and sorting the two from a position of limited information and limited time is a skill that takes years to develop. The quickest path does not go through that sorting process. It goes around it. There are funds, specifically exchange-traded funds, ETFs, built entirely around dividend-paying stocks. Some of them track the dividend aristocrats, the companies that have raised their dividend every year for 25 consecutive years or more. Some of them are built around broader baskets of high dividend payers across multiple sectors. Some of them combine dividend income with a covered call strategy that generates additional income on top of what the underlying stocks pay. These funds do the sorting for you. They hold dozens or hundreds of companies, so no single company's bad year, no single dividend cut, is capable of destroying your income stream. They trade on the stock exchange exactly like a stock, so you can buy them in any brokerage account you already have with no minimum beyond the price of a single share. I am not going to tell you which specific fund to buy. That is a decision that belongs to your specific situation, your tax circumstances, your income needs, your risk tolerance, and it belongs in a conversation with a financial advisor who knows those things about you. What I am telling you is that the category of dividend ETFs is the on-ramp to dividend income that does not require you to become an expert in individual stock analysis before you begin. It is the quickest legitimate path precisely because it removes the expertise barrier without removing the income potential. Dolores started here. She did not start by picking stocks. She started by understanding that a basket of companies with long histories of dividend growth was a fundamentally different thing than betting on any one company, and that the basket approach gave her the diversification that made the fear of being wrong twice survivable. She was not wrong twice with the basket. She was right, imperfectly, across dozens of companies at once, and the imperfections in any one of them were absorbed by the integrity of the rest. The second principle is harder to hear, and I'm going to say it anyway because I owe you honesty more than I owe you comfort. The quickest path to dividend income requires you to accept that the income and the principal are not the same thing, and that protecting both at once, maximizing yield while guaranteeing that the underlying value of your investment never falls, is not a choice that exists in the real world. It exists as a marketing promise. It exists as the framing of certain products that obscure their risks behind the language of safety. But as a genuine financial reality, an investment that pays you meaningful income and never fluctuates in value is not available. If someone tells you it is, they are either wrong or they are selling you something that hides its risk rather than eliminating it. I say this not to discourage you. I say it because the seniors who get hurt in dividend investing, the ones who experience something that genuinely feels like being wrong twice, are almost always the ones who entered it expecting both things simultaneously. They expected the income and the stability of a savings account, and when the market moved against them temporarily, they made decisions from fear that crystallized a paper loss into a real one. The dividend income approach works over time. It works across full market cycles. It works because the companies that reliably raise their dividends year after year are, by that fact, demonstrating the kind of underlying business health that tends to recover from market corrections and continue forward. But it requires something of the person practicing it. It requires the willingness to watch the stated value of the investment fluctuate, to see it go down in a difficult market, and to understand that the income it is generating has not stopped, the business underneath it has not failed, and the correct response is to hold, not to flee. My grandmother had a phrase she used when she was teaching me to tend a garden through a drought. She said, "The root does not die just because the surface looks dry." She was talking about plants, but she was also, without knowing the language for it, talking about the relationship between a stock's price and the business underneath it. The price is the surface. The dividend-generating capacity of the business is the root. A correction dries the surface. It does not, in a well-chosen and diversified position, kill the root. The quickest path to dividend income is not the path that gets you to the income fastest, while keeping everything else exactly the same. It is the path that gets you to the income in the way that allows you to stay, to hold through the fluctuations, to receive the payments, to watch the income grow as the companies raise their dividends year after year, to look back in 5 years at a stream of income that began while you were watching this and has not stopped since. There is a resource I want to mention here because it extends what we are doing today into the specific mechanics that a conversation like this cannot fully reach. It is called the Dividend Income Blueprint for Retirement, a structured guide to building an income portfolio from the beginning, written specifically for people who are approaching this without a professional background in finance, and who need to understand not just the concepts, but the sequence, what to learn first, what to set up first, where the common mistakes are, how to evaluate what you are looking at before you commit to it. The link is in the description. If today's conversation opened something for you, if you found yourself leaning forward at any point and thinking, "This applies to me," that resource is where you take the next step. Read it slowly. It was written for exactly your situation. The third principle is the one that separates the people who build lasting dividend income from the people who earn it for a season and then disrupt it with a decision made at the wrong moment for the wrong reason. It is reinvestment. In the early years of a dividend income strategy, before the income has grown large enough to serve as your primary income supplement, every dividend payment that you do not immediately need for living expenses belongs back in the account, buying more shares of the same investment that generated it. This is called a dividend reinvestment plan, or DRIP, and nearly every brokerage offers it automatically. You turn it on. You forget it is running. And what it does, quietly and without drama, is compound the thing that already compounds. A company that raises its dividend 3% per year and whose shares you are continuously adding to with reinvested dividends is not just growing your income at 3% per year. It is growing the number of shares you own, each of which pays you that growing dividend, each of which participates in the next increase. The math of this, genuine compounding on a growing payment, is what transforms a modest initial investment into an income stream that over a decade can look nothing like what the starting numbers suggested. I know a man named Gerald, 74 now, who began doing this at 62 when he took early retirement from a career in facilities management. He did not have a large amount to start with. He started with what he had, set the reinvestment to automatic, and did not touch it for 8 years. He watched the balance fluctuate. He watched it fall during a difficult market stretch in his mid-60s, and he did not sell, not because he was certain it would recover, but because he understood that what he was building was the income, not the price, and the income did not stop. When he turned 70 and began drawing from the account, the income it was producing was more than twice what the starting math would have suggested, because 8 years of reinvestment had built something that no single initial decision could have built alone. He told me once that the hardest part was the first difficult market. He said, I wanted to pull it out and put it somewhere I could see it wasn't changing. And then I thought about all the times in my life I had pulled something out of the ground because I was nervous, and found out later the root had been fine. He was talking about his garden. He was also, without quite meaning to, describing the most important psychological discipline in long-term dividend investing. Leave the root alone. Let me bring Dolores back, because her story has a place to land. She started with a dividend ETF in the category I described, a basket of companies with long histories of raising their dividends. She set reinvestment to automatic. She added to the position in small amounts whenever she could, in the years before she needed the income to be as large as it is now. She held through a difficult stretch in her late 60s when the balance fell, and her neighbor called her weekly to ask if she had sold yet. She had not sold. She held. She called me last year. She said, the income from this account now covers my supplemental expenses. Not all of them, most of them. And I can see that it will cover more of them next year than it covers this year. She paused, and then she said something I think about often. She said, I used to think I did not have time to be wrong twice. Now I understand that I didn't have time to be too afraid to try once. That is where the quickest path leads, not to a number, not to a yield, to the freedom of an income that you built, that grows without your permission, that no bank can lower because a committee met in Washington and adjusted a rate. The clock is running, not in the way that should frighten you, in the way that should move you, the way all honest clocks move the people who are listening to them, toward the thing that needs doing, done with care, done now, while the water is right and the window is open and the morning still holds. There is something I want to hear from you before you leave. Tell me in the comments, have you started building dividend income? And if you have, what was the moment that made you begin? Not the financial moment, the personal one. What was the conversation, or the statement, or the number on a page that finally made it feel real enough to move on? I read every comment in this community, and I mean that without exception. The answers you leave here are where the next conversation begins. If you are not yet part of what we are building in this space, I want to invite you, not as a transaction, not as a count that goes up on a screen somewhere, but as someone who belongs in a room where people are talking honestly about what the later chapters of a financial life require. That room is here. The people in it are serious and warm, and they are learning alongside you. Come back next week. We are going to talk about the specific income thresholds that can quietly trigger higher Medicare premiums and tax brackets, and the exact moves that keep dividend income from working against itself at tax time. That conversation is one you cannot afford to miss. There is more to teach.